Welcome back. You're live with Expresso and just in time for our weekly health discussion. And, well, our resident doc, Dr. Darren Green, is, of course, away on an expedition to Marion Island. What a joy. We're inviting guests from a range of very different fields at the moment. And I'm going to ask a very important question. Did you know that there is a link between your gut health and your brain health? So it makes sense that there is a connection, because when your stomach is empty, your brain tells you it's hungry, or in my case, you're hangry. You get very hangry.
So true. And when you're anxious or nervous, you get a weird feeling in your tummy.
Yeah.
I get that sometimes. Now today, for our weekly health segment, we're joined by integrative health specialist Dr. Sedicka Laskery to discuss this link, along with a host of other problems that can occur around it. How are you, Dr. Sedicka? So good to have you on the show.
I'm good, thanks. And you?
Oh, I'm very good. Now, this is a very important topic for me, because I feel like, you know, this is something that we all deal with. But I also heard that professionals say that the gut is your second brain. What exactly do they mean when they say that?
Yeah, interesting question there. So when we talk about the second brain, if one looks a bit more deeply at that, science has actually shown that there's these little receptors that we find situated in the gut that can communicate with the brain. Okay. And then likewise, we find cells in the brain that's able to communicate with the gut. So there's this kind of connection that's occurring between the gut and the brain, but more so is what we call the gut-brain axis. And I would like to elaborate on that in a later stage, which is really what actually plays the core role in allowing the gut and the brain to communicate in a very fancy way, at the same time communicating with many other systems in the body. So keeping in mind that if it's manipulating so many systems, we therefore see it as a second brain.
I absolutely love that. It's a nervous core, we know that, and I'm glad you said the word system, because we forget that our body is a closed system that is constantly trying to balance itself out. So how does an unhealthy gut exhibit in terms of how the brain works? How does it really affect the way that we think, the way that our brain can operate?
Yeah. Very good point that you're making there, and that's where it comes into understanding that we're a holistic being. Yeah. So our gut's made out of these really fancy little creatures, if I were to say. They're actually our friends, and they are our microbiome. And we're actually more microbiome than human cells. We're only 10% human cells, so that's quite interesting. And these microbiome are like our second brain in our gut. So they're found all over the body, but a larger portion is found in our gut. And if they're not in a healthy state, it can cause a ripple effect and damage to the brain. So when the gut's in a compromised state of health, we then find that inflammation starts brewing, and that then leads to inflammation that can occur in the brain and leads to various kinds of conditions occurring in the brain.
Wow, man.
So that's why I told you I'm so happy we're talking about this. Of course, we're discussing the link between the brain and gut health this morning. Dr. Sedicka is going to continue to be with us. I've heard something being thrown around a lot by a friend of mine, a leaky gut. I have no idea what it is. Hopefully the doc can tell us after this.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
We continue now with our health discussion with Dr. Laskery, an integrative health specialist. We're talking about the relationship between the gut and the brain and how important it is for us to maintain a healthy gut so that it doesn't affect our brain. Doctor, thank you so much for already what has been a hugely insightful discussion.
Absolutely.
I had no idea that they were linked so intricately.
Yeah. I heard about the term called a leaky gut syndrome, actually from a friend of mine who's all about gut health. What exactly is it? All about gut health.
Yes, people are quite interested in reading about it, and it's very integral to know more detail about it. So in a very simplistic way, I'll try and get it across. So the leaky gut, firstly, the gut's a phenomenal area. And like we say, all diseases probably stem from the gut. So it's got a very fascinating lining. And if I were to say these were two cells, these two cells are keeping each other connected by what we call tight junctions, and emphasis on the word tight in the sense that they're keeping the cells really tightly locked. And that's the barrier lining of the gut, because our immune system lies directly against the gut. So what happens in leaky gut is, from various kinds of underlying root causes like poor diet, poor exercise, inflammatory emotions, etc., damage to that lining occurs, and these cells start separating. And when they start separating, we have undigested proteins, carbs, any kind of food, bacteria, then seeping through that lining and into our bloodstream, which then has a ripple effect and stimulates our immune system and actually causes a hypersensitivity reaction. And then has a effect on the entire body in itself.
Oh, I would imagine a lot of light bulbs going off at the moment, and we're connected now with, on the line, it's Nell, I think. Neil, very good morning. Thank you so much for weighing in on the conversation. Do you have a question or a comment for our doc?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Graham. I just want to know if there's relation, or if there's anything that can affect your gut because there's a potential problem with your pituitary gland or your thyroid?
Interesting question.
Yes,
Doc?
quite an interesting question, and that comes in with the understanding of the gut-brain axis. And the gut-brain axis is basically a communication between the brain and the gut via what we'll say neuronal endocrine pathways. So there's literally a nervous system called the vagus nerve that communicates the brain on top and then at the bottom via the intestine. And then we have these nerves like a network coming out and communicating with our lungs, our spleen, our liver, our thyroid, our pancreas. So we have what we call thyroid gut abnormalities, reproductive gut abnormalities. There's a huge link. So definitely, if there's abnormalities in the brain, like a pituitary abnormality or hypothalamus abnormality, it directly has a ripple effect impact on the entire body. If the gut health is unhappy, the entire system feels unhappy.
Oh, man, we're going to continue this discussion. And again, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much, Neil, for that
Neil.
very interesting question. 083 9133 728. That's the number to have on speed dial.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back to your Feel Good Breakfast Show. It's Expresso right here on SABC3. We're doing a very interesting conversation this morning with our integrative health specialist, Dr. Sedicka Laskery. And we're talking about the link between brain health and gut health and how it all works
The
together.
second brain.
I
Yeah,
basically
get that
wanted to
term.
know from you, Doctor, is how do I know currently, presently, what are the symptoms that I would be experiencing if I currently had gut health? What's happening in my brain?
Yeah, specifically in the brain.
Okay, so the spectrum of symptoms that one can experience due to inflammation in the brain related to the gut would be brain fog, memory issues like short-term memory loss, even long-term memory, poor concentration, hyperactivity, which we see even in kids, depression, anxiety. The spectrum is quite huge, mood symptoms. So that kind of symptomatology is what we usually associate with inflamed brain. Yeah.
Wow, inflamed brain,
Inflamed.
though.
I feel like my brain is
Yeah,
inflamed
like
at
this
the
thing of
moment with
brain
absorbing all
inflammation, it sounds
inflammation.
hectic.
But I think also we often look for a far more complex reason as to why we are feeling unhealthy or why we are getting these symptoms when the answer could just purely be not having a healthy gut. So what tips do you have to creating the perfect gut, the most healthy gut that we can, knowing how complex that system actually is?
And reiterating that point, because it's such an intricate system and it influences all our organ systems as well, you need a holistic, integrated approach to deal with it correctly. So one wants to deem a good, healthy gut in the sense that our friends, the microbiome, a good diversity of them, as well as good communication between the gut and brain. So in other words, when you feel ill, you should be able to overcome that insult to the body and go back to normal state of health within few days, depending on what you are experiencing. So good health is basically dependent on a good diversity of communities of microbiome in our gut.
So are we looking at probiotics, those sorts of things, or how do we get it naturally with the diet that we're eating? What are the best ways to achieve that balance?
Well, an integrated approach, so that would start off by looking at one's diet, manipulating the diet, normally starting if the patient needs an elimination diet, one would start off by doing that. Yeah. And then looking what I call the 5 R's, which is sort of a basis around how to address the gut, which is removal. So removal of all kinds of triggers. That comes from the diet, any medication that may be exacerbating the situation. So from removal, we look at re-inoculating and replacing. So re-inoculating with the correct probiotics and prebiotic foods, as well as if we need to take them as supplementation. And then the various kinds of enzymes that the bodies may be lacking because of poor stomach production of enzymes, or your pancreas is related to also the production of certain kinds of enzymes needed for protein digestion that's influenced by your gut as well. And then we look at repair. So obviously the gut needs certain foods, so like L-glutamine, various kinds of things like barbiturate, which we do produce in our gut and often don't get enough. And then what we call reharmonization. And reharmonization is actually looking at how our psyche is influenced by our gut.
Oh, we want to reharmonize your entire life. This is so interesting. I think we could sit with you probably for about 5 hours to discuss this, but hopefully this has given you some indications of how you can approach the system that is your body, and we're going to keep the doctor around so we can continue that discussion. But hugely interesting. Please pose any questions you have as well on our Expresso Morning Show Facebook page.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Thank you so much, Kat. Of course, we are back with our integrative health specialist, Dr. Sedicka Laskery, and we're talking about the link between brain health and gut health. And there's some really, really interesting things. We've talked about the inflamed brain, the leaky gut, very awesome stuff. But we do have a caller on the line this morning. Cheryl, good morning from Cape Town. How are you?
Cheryl.
Good morning. Hi.
Cheryl,
Yes.
what's your
What's your
comment or your question?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. My comment or the question I have is, what is the correlation between...
Cheryl, you might
yes,
want to
hi.
turn down your TV in the background because that's what's
Okay.
throwing you off. Yeah.
Yeah, we're
right,
getting you in
thanks.
stereo. So turn that down and then chat. What is your question for the
The
doctor?
question is, what's the correlation between migraine and vomiting?
Wow, okay.
Interesting question.
You're
Thank
nodding
you so
your
much,
head
Cheryl.
emphatically there, like that's a very good question. What
always
are the links?
Yeah, I'm always fascinated by these kind of symptoms because
Yeah.
these we'll classify as non-specific symptoms, and often it can baffle a practitioner's mind.
Yeah.
This once again brings us back to why the body is a holistic being. All systems affect each other, so the symptoms that can come out are non-specific. That nausea, that headache could be related to the fact that her gut's not in a very healthy state. Because it's not in a healthy state, the gut-brain axis and the communication between the brain and the gut is hampered. So she experiences headaches, which may be a bit of a, a loophole in her health and comes out in that way. Another person may exhibit it maybe via having IBS symptoms. So the fact that she's having migraines doesn't necessarily mean the problem's in the brain, but it could be related to the gut. So it's quite an intense integrated system where she needs to look at sorting out her gut, looking at what's going on in her lifestyle, and that then has an impact on the entire body, including the brain.
It's almost like a short circuit is happening somewhere in
Yes.
that neural pathway. Let's take it a step further and talk about anxiety and depression as a result of the gut. Is that possible? Are we only looking at an inflamed brain, or can it actually affect our mood to that degree?
Well, because we're looking at a growing science of gut health and the microbiome in today's science and technology era, we've managed to see that clinical trials, for example, with irritable bowel syndrome, has seen patients having depression and anxiety linked to what we call gut dysbiosis. And gut dysbiosis, in a nutshell, is an imbalance between our good and bad bacteria. So they've actually found another class of microbes in our gut called psychobiotics. And emphasis on the word psycho.
So I can get hangry. When I get hangry, I'm really hangry. That's amazing.
Yeah, and they have the ability to actually alter our mind and behavior. And we do see anxiety and depression alleviated by manipulation of the gut. So there's definitely a link.
Oh,
Thank you so much, Dr. Sedicka. This is, like Graham said, this is something that we can continue talking about for a while, but at least we've opened up this very interesting topic about gut health and, of course, the healthy brain as well. Well, it's time for us to head to the kitchen where we're going to be dealing with healthy food and how that can help our brain health as well.